Hi, believers. Today's story is proof that faith can turn struggles into victories. Part 1. The question that lights the first flame. What happens when a woman decides she will never lose again? Not hope, not wish. Decide. The question hung in the air like smoke, invisible yet choking, wrapping itself around Maya's restless mind. It was 1:47 a.m., the kind of hour when the world feels like it has forgotten you. The faint hum of the fridge was steady, almost cruel in its normalcy. The clock on the wall ticked with ruthless precision, as if mocking her, reminding her of every passing second she was stuck in this mess. Outside, the city was a graveyard of silence. But inside her tiny apartment, chaos lived and breathed. Just hours ago, her life had taken another brutal hit. First, the email, "We regret to inform you." That was how they ended it. No explanation, no second chance, just a line of text that slammed the door on the job she thought would finally give her stability. Then, as if the universe hadn't finished with her, the man she trusted, the one she had given her loyalty, her time, her soul, walked away. No fight, no hesitation, just cold words typed on a screen. His final message still glared at her like a scar burned onto glass. "You'll never make it without me." It wasn't just a sentence. It was an execution, a declaration that she was nothing, that she had no power of her own. Every letter felt like a stone crushing her chest. She read it again and again, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't stop. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling, heart pounding against her ribs as if trying to escape. The mirror across the room reflected a woman she barely recognized. Hair undone, mascara smudged, tears carving dark rivers down her cheeks. She was a picture of defeat, but behind those swollen eyes was something more dangerous than sorrow: anger. She leaned closer to the mirror, her breath fogging the glass. Her voice cracked at first, but then sharpened into steel. "Watch me." That whisper wasn't fragile. It wasn't weak. It was the start of war. They say, a storm either breaks you or becomes the wind in your sails. That night, Maya chose the wind. She refused to let the storm drown her. She decided it would push her forward, no matter how violent the waves. The apartment around her was a battlefield. Bills were scattered across the table like fallen soldiers. Empty coffee cups lined the counter, remnants of sleepless nights. On the floor near the couch, a torn photo of her and him lay face down, its edges curled as if even the paper wanted to erase the memory. The air smelled faintly of stale perfume and hopelessness, but there was also something new, something raw. Determination. She pulled her journal from the nightstand, its leather cover worn and scarred. The pen shook in her grip, but the words spilled out like blood. "I will not be defined by what I lost. I will be defined by what I build." Every line she wrote was a rebellion. Every sentence was a brick she laid in the foundation of a new life. She wrote until her fingers cramped, until ink smudged across her hand, until her tears dropped onto the page and blurred her vows. But she didn't stop. What happens when a woman decides she will never lose again? She thought once more. The answer was beginning to take shape, like fire igniting in a dark cave. She stood up, pacing the room, her bare feet pressed against the cold floor, grounding her in the reality of the moment. She could almost hear the echo of his voice, that cruel certainty dripping from his words. But instead of breaking her, it hardened her. She spoke out loud, to the empty room, as if addressing the entire world. I will make it without you. I will rise without you. And when I do, you'll remember the night you told me I couldn't. The silence after her declaration felt different. Not heavy anymore, but alive. The hum of the fridge and the ticking clock became background noise to something louder, the rhythm of her own resolve. Pain, she reminded herself, is temporary, but surrender is permanent. She opened her window and let the cold night air hit her face. The city lights in the distance looked small, almost mocking, but they also reminded her life was still out there. Opportunities, chances, victories, they hadn't vanished. They were just waiting for her to fight for them. For the first time in months, Maya didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a soldier sharpening her blade. She wasn't sure what the next step was, how she'd pay rent, how she'd find another job, how she'd heal the wound he left behind. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would not quit. Her phone buzzed again. For a moment, her heart raced, thinking it might be him. But it was only a notification, a motivational quote from an app she had downloaded long ago but never opened. The timing was eerie, almost divine. It read, she remembered who she was, and the game changed. Maya smiled through the tears. Exactly. She closed her journal, placed it on the desk, and whispered once more, this time not to him, not to the mirror, but to herself. I will win. That night, in the quietest hours of despair, a promise was born. A promise that would become the engine of her journey. Because the truth is simple. The world doesn't fear those who hope. The world fears those who decide. And Maya had decided. Part 2. The birth of a warrior's mindset. The first thing she did wasn't to search for comfort. It was to search for clarity. Comfort was a trap, and she knew it. Comfort was the soft blanket that lulled people back into sleep when life demanded they rise. That night, comfort would have been scrolling through her phone, crying herself numb, or convincing herself that tomorrow she would figure it out. But tomorrow was too far. Tomorrow was uncertain. What she needed was a decision now. So she grabbed her notebook, the same one where she had already written her vow hours earlier, and this time she didn't hesitate. In big, bold, furious strokes of the pen, she carved out 3 words so large they bled through the page. I will win. She underlined them once, twice, then circled the words until the ink nearly tore the paper. They weren't just words anymore. They were law. Underneath, she wrote the rules of her new life. 1. No more blaming. 2. No more waiting. 3. No more asking for permission. Each rule was like a knife cutting away the old version of her. The one who hesitated, the one who begged, the one who believed she needed others to validate her. She paused, letting the gravity of it settle in her chest. This wasn't about writing motivational fluff in a journal. This was about survival. And survival demanded a warrior's mindset. Then she wrote down a quote, one that hit her with the force of lightning. It became her battle cry, her anthem, the pulse in her veins. You can't wait for the light at the end of the tunnel. You have to build your own damn torch. As she scrawled the words, she whispered them aloud, her voice low and dangerous, like a soldier reciting a vow before war. A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from the fire that was being born inside her. From that moment, the blueprint of her comeback began to take shape. Not vague, not blurry, but sharp, ruthless, and fearless. She wasn't going to dream. She was going to act. She wrote her action steps with the same force she had written her promise. Learn 2 high-income skills. Apply to 20 jobs every single week, no excuses. Save every spare dollar like her life depended on it. Train her body like an athlete. Train her mind like a soldier. Each step felt like stacking weapons in her arsenal. These weren't resolutions. They were commands. Orders issued to herself from a higher version of her soul. As the clock ticked past 4 a.m., her hand was still moving across the page. Sleep begged her to give in, but she refused. Sleep was for the woman she used to be. Now she was different. Something had shifted in her, like steel hardening under flame. She looked around her tiny apartment. Hours ago it felt like a prison, but now it looked like a training ground. The bills weren't enemies anymore. They were sparring partners, challenges to sharpen her resolve. The empty fridge wasn't proof of failure. It was proof that she had nothing left to lose, and nothing left to lose makes a fighter dangerous. She thought about him, the man who said she couldn't make it. And instead of collapsing under the memory, she smiled, a razor-edge smile. "Thank you," she muttered. "Your doubt is fuel." Maya pushed herself up from the chair, stretching her stiff body. She walked to the mirror once more, but this time she didn't see the broken woman from earlier. She saw someone raw, someone scarred, but someone dangerous. The eyes looking back at her weren't soft anymore. They were sharp, calculating, alive with fire. "Victims wait for conditions to change," she said out loud to her reflection. "But fighters? Fighters fight in the rain, in the dark, in the cold. Fighters fight when their knuckles bleed and their knees shake. Fighters fight because they have no choice." The words weren't rehearsed. They came from a place deeper than thought, from the pit of her stomach, from the ashes of her pain. She wrote another quote under her list, almost as a signature to her new identity. A warrior doesn't wait for the battlefield to be fair. She creates victory out of chaos. She pressed the pen so hard into the paper that her hand ached, but she didn't care. Pain was nothing now. Pain was a signal that she was alive, that she was building something new. She pulled out her laptop, the screen glowing in the dark room, and searched high-income skills. Options flooded the screen: digital marketing, copywriting, coding, graphic design. She didn't know which one she'd master yet, but she knew she'd master at least 2. She bookmarked courses, scribbled down notes, and mapped out schedules. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind was electric. She felt alive, as if some hidden energy inside her had been unlocked. Every second was precious. Every breath was fuel. At one point, she glanced at the time, 4:37 a.m., and laughed. Just hours ago, she was drowning in despair, but now she felt like a warrior sharpening her blade before battle. Maybe this is what rock bottom is for, she thought. Not to bury you, but to force you to build the wings you never knew you had. And for the first time, she didn't feel cursed by her pain. She felt chosen by it. Her body finally gave way, exhaustion pulling her down onto the bed. But even as her eyes closed, the words she had written glowed in her mind like fire on stone. "I will win." And she knew tomorrow would not be the same. Because the birth of a warrior's mindset is not a moment you can undo. It's not a promise you can unmake. Once the fire starts, it doesn't ask for permission. It consumes everything. And Maya was ready to burn her old life to the ground. Part 3. The fight against the world's voice. The next weeks were war. Not the kind of war fought with guns and armies, but the kind of war that tears you from the inside. The war against the voices of the world. Voices that weren't made of bullets, but of doubts, of expectations, of chains disguised as concern. Her family, well-meaning but caged by fear, said the same words over and over. Be realistic, Maya. Don't push yourself too hard. Life isn't meant to be this difficult. To them, realism meant settling, shrinking dreams down to fit inside their comfort zone. But to Maya, realism meant staring the truth in the face, that no one was coming to save her, and she had to become her own rescue. Her friends echoed another chorus. Take it slow. Why are you rushing? Why punish yourself? You'll burn out. But Maya knew better. She could hear the poison hidden in those soft words. Take it slow was just another way of saying, stay average. Stay safe. Stay stuck. And then there was social media screaming at her every time she opened her phone. Endless feeds of people relaxing, treating themselves, taking breaks. Society had turned self-indulgence into a religion, worshiping instant gratification. But Maya looked at the glossy posts and whispered to herself, comfort is a slow poison. It tastes sweet, but it kills your hunger. So she chose hunger. Every morning, she woke up at 5 a.m., before the sun, before the world could drown her resolve with noise. She laced up the only pair of sneakers she had left, their soles thinning, and hit the streets. The air was sharp against her lungs, the pavement cold under her feet, but each mile she ran carved weakness out of her body and replaced it with grit. By the time the sun broke the horizon, she was soaked in sweat, her heart pounding, her chest burning. And with every gasp, she whispered, I'm alive. I'm fighting. I'm building. When she returned home, her shirt clung to her skin, her legs ached, but her spirit was sharper than the blade of a knife. She'd brew a cheap cup of coffee, sit at her old laptop, and get to work. No distractions. No excuses. She threw herself into freelance jobs she'd never tried before. Copywriting, graphic design, selling products online. She didn't wait to be an expert. She learned as she went, failing fast, adjusting faster. Every gig, no matter how small, became a brick she stacked in the foundation of her empire. But the world, as always, didn't make it easy. One client disappeared without paying her, vanishing with the hours of work she had poured into their project. She stared at the empty inbox, rage bubbling inside. But instead of crying, she muttered through clenched teeth. Lesson learned. Never depend on fairness. The world doesn't owe me justice. I'll take it myself. Then, as if fate wanted to test her again, her laptop, the fragile machine that carried all her hopes, crashed in the middle of an important project. For a moment, the screen went black, and her stomach dropped with it. She sat in the silence, panic clawing at her chest. But she refused to break. She ran to the library, borrowed an old computer, stayed until midnight, and redid the project from scratch. She refused to give life the satisfaction of watching her fold. And then, just when she thought she had faced enough, the message came. From him. The ex who had abandoned her when she was at her weakest, the man who had sworn she couldn't make it without him. His words burned on the screen. Just give up already. For a long minute, she stared at it. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every cell in her body screamed to reply, to lash out, to throw his venom back in his face. But she didn't. She didn't give him the dignity of a response. Instead, she closed the chat window, turned her music louder, and worked harder. Her silence was her weapon. Her progress would be her revenge. She whispered to herself, "A wolf doesn't answer the barking of dogs." The days blurred together into a relentless rhythm, running at dawn, hustling during the day, studying new skills at night. She slept less, but she lived more. Fatigue pressed on her shoulders, but discipline carried her forward. Her friends rolled their eyes. Her family worried. Strangers mocked her grind. But none of their voices were louder than the one inside her, the one that said, "Keep going. This is the price. This is the path." One night, exhausted but unbroken, she scribbled in her journal, "Discomfort is the currency of growth, and I am willing to pay in full." She shut the notebook, leaned back, and exhaled. The world was loud, yes. The world told her to stop, to slow, to give up. But she had already made her choice. And the truth was simple. You can't silence the world's voice, but you can make yours louder. And Maya was just getting started. Quote of this season: "The best revenge is turning your pain into a power they can't ignore." Part 4, the night of breakthrough. One evening, almost a year after that first war cry, at 1:47 a.m., Maya sat at the same kitchen table where she had once broken down in tears. The room was the same, the chipped paint on the wall, the old clock ticking above the fridge, the dull light flickering overhead. But the energy was different. The table that had once been littered with overdue bills, unopened letters, and tissues soaked with despair was now covered with something entirely new. Invoices, client contracts, spreadsheets, and bank statements that glowed with numbers she never thought she'd see attached to her name. Her hands brushed over the papers as if to make sure they were real. The bank statement showed a balance larger than anything she had ever earned in her life. The contracts bore signatures of clients from across the globe, people who trusted her work, people who sought her expertise. It was almost unreal. That night, she wasn't chasing survival anymore. She was finalizing a deal with a company overseas, a deal that would triple her income, one that could fund dreams she had once buried under fear. The cursor blinked on the screen, hovering over the send button of the signed contract. For a second, her hand hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awe. Then she clicked. The email flew into cyberspace, and with it, a chapter of her life closed while another began. Maya leaned back in her chair, her chest rising and falling as if she had just crossed a finish line. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, the memories came rushing back. The cold night when everything was falling apart, the mirror streaked with her tears, the vow she had whispered through clenched teeth. "Watch me." She opened her eyes again, and her gaze fell on the fridge across the room. It still hummed the same low, mechanical song, just as it had that night a year ago. The world outside was still quiet, the streets asleep, the stars indifferent. But the woman sitting in that chair was no longer the same. She was unrecognizable. This wasn't the woman who had begged life to give her mercy. This wasn't the woman who had thought she was nothing without someone else's love. This wasn't the woman who had been afraid of bills, afraid of failure, afraid of her own shadow. That woman was gone, burned to ashes in the fire of her own resolve. Now sat a warrior, a fighter who had trained her body until sweat felt like prayer, a learner who had sharpened her mind until late nights at the laptop became her battlefield, a builder who had stacked every brick of her empire with her own blood, tears, and determination. She whispered to herself, almost laughing at the irony. Same chair, same fridge, same room, different woman. The silence of the room wrapped around her, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like victory. It felt like proof that all those voices, the ones that said be realistic, the ones that said slow down, the one that told her you'll never make it without me, were wrong. Dead wrong. She pulled her journal closer, the same leather notebook she had filled that first night, and flipped to a fresh page. With steady hands, she wrote, "A year ago, I promised I would win. Tonight, I kept that promise." Her pen hovered for a moment before she added another line, a reminder to her future self. Victory doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who refuse to quit. Her phone buzzed with a new notification. It was the confirmation email of the signed contract she had just sent. She smiled, not the fragile smile of relief, but the fierce smile of triumph. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was sweat, scars, and sacrifice crystallized into success. She remembered the nights when she had only $20 left in her account, the mornings when her muscles screamed from running before dawn, the days when she had stared at rejection emails, her throat tight, but kept applying anyway. Every single moment had brought her here. She leaned back, closed her eyes again, and thought, pain is never wasted. It either destroys you or it builds you. Maya had chosen to let it build her. Her phone vibrated once more. This time it was a message from her ex, the same man who had told her she would never make it. Her heart raced as she opened it. Just 3 words. I was wrong. She stared at the screen, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with calm power. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. His doubt had been fuel. His rejection had been the spark. But his validation? That was meaningless. She had already validated herself. She set the phone down, whispering, "I don't need your words. My life is my proof." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and she realized something. She had spent months fighting, months bleeding, months doubting, and pushing through. But now, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was thriving. She walked to the window and looked outside. The city was still asleep, the streets dimly lit. But to her, the world looked different, brighter, like a canvas waiting for her to paint. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered, "I'm not done. This is only the beginning." For the first time, she felt the weight of freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes not from escape, but from conquest. And as she turned back to her desk, her eyes fell on the journal again. She added one last quote at the bottom of the page, a line that summed up the journey of the past year. "The world tried to bury me, but it forgot. I am the seed." The fridge still hummed. The night was still quiet. But Maya knew the truth. She was no longer the same woman who had sat there a year ago. She had fought. She had bled. She had built herself from the ground up. And tonight, she had broken through. Quote for this moment, "It's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Part 5. The Woman Who Wins. Maya didn't just change her life. She transformed into the kind of woman who could ignite change in the lives of others. Her victories weren't confined to her own story anymore. They spilled over into the hearts and minds of those who crossed her path. She became a force of nature, not because the world gave her permission, but because she stopped asking for it. She had known darkness, silence, and rejection. She had faced doors slammed in her face, opportunities stolen by doubt, and nights when even hope felt like a stranger. But those very struggles carved something unshakable in her. When Maya finally stood tall, she didn't stand just for herself. She stood for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. Instead of chasing validation, Maya created her own stage. She began mentoring young women in her community, girls who were told to stay quiet, to settle, to stop dreaming too big. She didn't hand them easy answers. She gave them skills, tools, and the kind of raw courage that cannot be borrowed from books or borrowed from speeches. She taught them how to fight, not with fists, but with conviction, persistence, and the fire to claim what was rightfully theirs. One girl, Aisha, came to Maya broken after being rejected from her dream job 3 times. She was ready to give up. Maya looked her in the eyes and said, "Rejection is just proof that you're still in the game. Losing is not the opposite of winning. It's the workshop where winning is built." Aisha didn't just walk away with comfort. She walked away with a new fire. Months later, she landed a position that changed her entire career path. And when she came back to thank Maya, Maya simply smiled and said, "You were the one who chose not to quit." That's the real victory. Another young woman, Sana, battled fear every time she tried to speak in public. Maya refused to let her shrink back into silence. She made her practice in front of a small group, then a bigger one, until Sana's voice grew strong, clear, undeniable. When Sana finally gave a powerful speech at her university, Maya stood at the back of the room, not for recognition, but to witness the proof that courage is contagious. Maya often told her students, winning isn't about one big moment. It's about the night you decide, deep in your soul, that you will never stop fighting until you get what you came for. She drilled this into their hearts until it became more than advice. It became a battle cry. She didn't preach perfection. She preached resilience. She didn't glorify overnight success. She glorified the nights spent awake, working on yourself when no one else was watching. And her words carried weight because they weren't borrowed. They were lived. Every scar, every wound, every failure in Maya's past made her message unshakably real. But what made Maya unforgettable wasn't just her wisdom. It was her boldness. She dared to say the things others softened. She dared to confront the truths others ignored. She told women to stop apologizing for existing, to stop shrinking themselves so others could feel comfortable. Asterisk, if your dream doesn't scare you, she'd say, then it's not big enough. And if your ambition makes someone else uncomfortable, let it. Their discomfort is not your problem. This boldness didn't always make her popular, but made her powerful. And slowly, she built a circle of women who no longer asked, "Can I?" but instead declared, "Watch me." Her own transformation became their roadmap. They saw that Maya wasn't born fearless. She built her courage one broken night at a time. They saw that she didn't wait for the perfect chance. She created it by refusing to quit. And the more she shared her truth, the more others rose with her. The ripple effect was undeniable. Women she mentored began mentoring others. A single flame had become a wildfire, spreading through classrooms, offices, homes, and communities. What began as one woman's decision to fight for herself evolved into a revolution of voices refusing to be silenced. And here's the truth you cannot ignore. None of this would have happened if Maya hadn't reached that breaking point years ago, the night she whispered to herself, "I will win." No matter what. That moment didn't just change her destiny, it created a legacy. So if you're watching this right now and your world feels like it's collapsing, remember Maya. Remember the nights she sat alone, feeling powerless before she chose to rise. Remember the day she stopped waiting for someone to rescue her and became her own savior. Remember how she turned her scars into lessons and her battles into blueprints. Maybe tonight is your night. Maybe right now is your moment. Not the easy moment, not the comfortable one, but the defining one. The night you draw a line and declare that giving up is no longer an option. The night you stop begging for permission and start taking ownership of your future. Because the truth is, victory is not a crown handed to you by the world. It is a fire you set within yourself. Winning is not about applause or recognition. It's about refusing to surrender until the life you imagine becomes the life you live. And like Maya, you don't have to wait for the perfect time. You only have to decide that this time, the time you have right now, is enough. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.